My brother moved his family into our parents' home without asking. Now we evicted him after he tried to take over. I'm 32, a guy who's always tried to be there for my parents. We're not the perfect family, but we're close. My parents are the quiet, hardworking type. They've lived in the same house for 40 years, small, nothing fancy, but it's theirs. They work their asses off to pay it off. It's where we grew up. Then there's my brother Jay. He's 34 and, honestly, always been a bit of an asshole. I didn't notice it as much when we were younger, but it became clear once we hit adulthood. Jay always has this chip on his shoulder, like the world owes him something. Life never treated him fair, according to him. Nothing was ever his fault. Relationships, everything that went wrong was because of someone else. He married S about 8 years ago, and let's just say she's even worse. Entitlement runs through her veins. They have 2 kids and I love them, but the way Jay and S act makes it hard to even be around them. So about a year ago, Jay loses his job. No surprise there. He's been bouncing between gigs for years, mostly because he thinks he's too good for the jobs he gets. One day he decides he's done. He's always got an excuse. Boss didn't appreciate him, coworkers were idiots, you name it. And without any warning, Jay, S, and their 2 kids just move into our parents' house. No call, no heads up, nothing. Just one day, they show up with boxes like it's a done deal. My parents are old school, and they hate conflict. They probably didn't know what to say, so they just let them stay. I found out when I dropped by a few days later. I walk in, and the place is a damn disaster. Boxes everywhere, toys scattered across the floor. My parents looked exhausted. Jay and S? They'd taken the master bedroom. My parents were now sleeping in the cramped guest room. What the hell is going on? I asked my mom. She just shrugged like she was trying not to make a big deal of it. Jay and S needed a place for a while. That for a while turned into weeks, then months. Jay and S made themselves comfortable, real comfortable. They treated the house like it was theirs, taking over every inch. S started throwing around opinions like she ran the place. She complained about how cramped everything was, how my parents didn't keep things clean enough. She even had the nerve to suggest getting rid of my dad's recliner, because it took up too much space in the living room. I could see my dad was pissed, but he didn't say a word. That's what made me angrier, the fact that they weren't standing up for themselves. So I talked to my parents. I told them they needed to put their foot down. But my mom just said, they need help, it's temporary. Temporary? Sure didn't feel temporary. Then it got worse. One Saturday I was over for lunch, and Ness pulled me aside, straight up told me I shouldn't come by so often. We need our own space, she said, like she was trying to be polite about it, but her tone was anything but. You know, it's kind of our home now, and we've got a lot going on with the kids. I laughed. I literally thought she was joking. Your home? I asked. She didn't even blink. Well, yeah, we live here now. I looked over at Jay, expecting him to at least acknowledge how insane this sounded. But no, he just nodded. Yeah, man, we need some privacy. We got our own family, you know? I was stunned. This isn't your house, I shot back. It's Mom and Dad's house. You can't just tell me not to come over. S crossed her arms. We got a lot going on, and it's hard enough without people dropping by whenever they want. It's best if you respect our space. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at my mom, hoping she'd jump in, but she didn't say a word. My dad just stared at his plate. I was fuming. I tried talking to Jay after that. Tried to be reasonable. I told him he was out of line, that he couldn't just take over our parents' house and push everyone out. He just rolled his eyes. Look, man, we're family, Jay said, like that was supposed to make everything okay. Mom and Dad said we could stay. So what's the big deal? We're not hurting anyone. You're hurting them, I snapped. You've taken over the house. You treat them like they're guests in their own home. It's not right, Jay shrugged. They don't mind. You're overreacting. I wanted to punch him in the face, but I knew that wouldn't fix anything. Weeks went by, and it only got worse. I started doing little things that made my blood boil. One day, I came over and noticed that all of my mom's stuff, her china, her old photo albums, things that had been around forever, was gone. I found it later, all packed up in boxes in the attic. Why the hell is all of Mom's stuff packed away? I asked S. She didn't even look up from her phone. It was just clutter. We needed more space for the kids, so I tidied up. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. I couldn't believe it. That's Mom's stuff. You can't just pack it away like that. Well, someone had to, she said in that condescending tone she always used. It's just taking up space, and the kids need room to play. I stared at her, trying to keep my cool. This isn't your house. You don't get to decide what's clutter and what isn't. She just shrugged and went back to whatever she was doing. I was furious. But the final straw was when I found out they were messing with my parents' finances. Jay wasn't paying for anything. My parents were footing the bill for everything. Food, utilities, even gas money for Jay's car. They were bleeding my parents dry, and Jay acted like it was no big deal. I asked my mom about it, and she just waved it off, saying we're family. They need help right now. I confronted Jay again. You guys need to start contributing. Mom and Dad are covering everything, and it's not right. He looked at me like I was insane. They got savings, right? They're fine. I was losing it. They're not fine, Jay. They're too nice to tell you, but you're draining them. He shrugged again. We're just trying to get back on our feet. It's not a big deal. I wanted to throttle him. He genuinely believed that our parents' money was his to take. Then came the biggest, dirtiest trick of all. S decided it was time to make some changes to the house. She and Jay started talking about how they needed a bigger place, something more suitable for raising a family. At first, it was just talk about repainting the walls or rearranging furniture, but then S took it up a notch. One day, my mom called me, practically in tears. Apparently, S had contacted a real estate agent behind their backs. She and Jay had been planning to sell the house and buy a bigger place, but here's the kicker. They wanted the new place in their name, not my parents'. They expected my parents to sell the house they'd worked for their whole lives, so they could start fresh in a house Jay and S would own. I drove straight over there, didn't even knock, and walked right in. Jay and S were sitting at the kitchen table, acting like everything was normal. What the fuck is this? I hear about you trying to sell the house, I demanded. S just raised an eyebrow, not even looking ashamed. We were just talking to an agent. We need more space for the kids. This house isn't big enough for all of us. I looked at Jay, thinking maybe he'd at least feel embarrassed. But no, he just nodded like S made sense. We thought it'd be better for everyone, a new place, more room. Mom and Dad can live with us in the new house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you out of your goddamn minds? This isn't your house. You don't get to make that call. S just rolled her eyes. We're doing what's best for the family. The kids need a better environment. It's not like your parents need all this space. They don't need all this space. This is their home, you entitled asshole. I turned to my dad, who was sitting there quietly, staring at the floor. You're really going to let them sell your house? My dad finally spoke up, his voice barely audible. I don't want to move. This is our home. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let Jay and S screw my parents over. I told my parents they needed to evict them now. My mom looked horrified at the thought, but my dad just nodded. We can't keep living like this. That night, I contacted a lawyer. I wasn't messing around anymore. If Jay and S thought they could steamroll my parents, they had another thing coming. My parents were hesitant at first. They didn't want to cause trouble. But I convinced them that this wasn't about making waves. It was about saving what was rightfully theirs. Over the next few days, the tension in the house hit an all-time high. My parents served Jay and S with formal eviction papers, which was, as you can imagine, not taken well. The day Jay got them, he stormed into the kitchen where I was sitting with my dad. You serious with this? He waved the papers in my face, like he couldn't believe we'd actually gone through with it. Dead serious, I said, staring him down. You've been living here like it's your house, treating Mom and Dad like they don't matter. Enough is enough. S came in behind him, holding their youngest kid on her hip, looking just as pissed. You're kicking us out? We're family. Who the hell does that? You've taken advantage of family, I shot back. And don't act like you're the victim here. You've treated this place like a free ride while draining Mom and Dad dry. You're lucky we didn't do this sooner. Jay threw the papers down on the table. You're going to regret this. We'll fight it. You can't just throw us out on the street. I crossed my arms. Actually, we can, and we did. You've got 30 days. But they didn't go quietly, of course. The next few weeks were a nightmare. J and S tried every dirty trick in the book to stall the eviction, to guilt my parents into changing their minds. The first week after the papers were served, S started spreading rumors around the family that I was manipulating my parents, turning them against J. She went on and on about how I was forcing them to evict their own son, telling people I was only doing it because I wanted the house for myself. It was ridiculous, but some of the extended family actually bought it. My aunt called me up, angry as hell, saying, "How could you? Your brother's got kids. You're making your own family homeless." I had to sit her down and explain the actual situation, how J and S had taken over, how they were bleeding my parents dry, and how they were the ones planning to kick my parents out of their own home. Thankfully, once I laid it all out, most people saw through the bullshit. But the fact that J and S would go that far to twist the narrative, it just showed how little they cared about anyone but themselves. Then they started playing the "We've got kids" card even harder. One night, S went straight to my mom, guilt-tripping her with the kids in tow. "How can you do this to your grandkids?" she sobbed, holding the youngest one in her arms like some kind of prop. "They're going to be on the streets because of you." My mom, who's the kindest person I know, was visibly shaken. But this time, she didn't budge. She just looked at S and said, "We've done everything we can for you. You have 30 days to find a new place. That's more than fair." S looked stunned, like she couldn't believe my mom was actually standing up to her. "You're heartless," she spat before storming out. The closer we got to the eviction deadline, the dirtier their tactics became. Jay stopped even pretending to be civil. He started locking my parents out of certain parts of the house, literally changed the locks on the master bedroom and the basement, claiming it was for privacy. My parents had to knock just to get into their own bathroom. I was livid. I confronted him one day after work. "You seriously locked them out of their own room?" He shrugged. "We need our space. It's not like they use it." "They use it when you aren't hogging it," I snapped. "This is their house, not yours." He just smirked, not for long. That's when I realized they had no intention of leaving willingly. They were going to drag this out, make it as painful as possible, hoping my parents would break and let them stay. But I wasn't letting that happen, so I ramped things up. I called the lawyer again and filed for a formal order to remove them if they didn't leave by the eviction date. I didn't tell J or S about it. Figured they didn't need to know just yet. The final week before the deadline, J tried one last desperate move. I came over one night to find him sitting at the kitchen table with some paperwork spread out. Turns out he'd gone and tried to file a fake lease agreement with my parents' signatures forged at the bottom, claiming they'd agreed to rent him the house. He thought if he had a lease, he could stay legally. I lost it. "You forged a lease? Are you insane?" Jay didn't even try to deny it. He just looked at me, defiant. "You're not going to win, man. I'll stay here as long as I need to. You think you're so smart, but you can't just kick me out." I grabbed the papers and tossed them in the trash. "This isn't a game, Jay. You've been nothing but a parasite, and you're out of time." I could see it in his eyes. He knew the gig was up, but he wasn't going to admit it. The day of the eviction finally came. I showed up with the sheriff, the court order in hand. J and S were waiting, their stuff barely packed, clearly expecting us to back down at the last minute. "We're really doing this, huh?" Jay said, crossing his arms like he was still in control. "Yep," I said, "get your stuff and go." S started crying, putting on her usual performance. "I can't believe you're doing this to us." But for once, my parents didn't cave. My dad stood by the door, arms crossed, and my mom stayed quiet but resolute. The sheriff gave them an hour to get their stuff together, and they left kicking and screaming the whole way. S shouted that we'd regret this, that we were destroying the family. Jay just glared at me as they packed up their car, like I'd personally ruined his life. But you know what? Once they were gone, the house felt lighter. My parents were exhausted, but they were finally free. They could live in their home again without feeling like prisoners. It wasn't a happy ending, not really. Jay and S cut off contact after that. except for the occasional passive-aggressive text about how hard their life was now that they didn't have a support system. They ended up renting a tiny apartment a few towns over. I haven't seen my nieces and nephews in months. But the truth is, I don't regret it, not for a second. Sometimes family takes advantage, and sometimes you've got to put your foot down, no matter how hard it is. If you've got entitled family members trying to take over, remember, you don't owe them anything, especially when they're the ones acting like they're the victims. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.